Many of you may remember that 3 years ago, around this time, the Trump legal team were involved in a full fledged effort to spread falsehoods about election fraud so they could convince swing state legislatures to throw out the results of the 2020 election. As an example of that, Rudy Giuliani and Jenna Ellis held a hearing with the Republicans in Arizona's legislature at a Phoenix hotel. Jenna, of course, recently pled guilty in the Fulton County case. They had also invited Colonel Phil Waldron, an ally of General Flynn, who spread insane conspiracy theories in the sober tones of an analyst. One of the people watching was cybersecurity expert Rob Graham, who live tweeted his impressions as the hearing proceeded. I spoke to him about why the evidence presented for election fraud was not evidence at all. Can you tell the listeners something about yourself, your background, why you were able to debunk that?
I'm a well-known cybersecurity expert. I've been for many years. And on the periphery, I've been dealing with election security for many years. And that sort of ramped up after the 2020 election because of just so much technology, as you say, so many technology-centered conspiracy theories that, as a technical expert, I'm qualified to answer. And so I weighed in more and more and more, such as that sort of live tweeting that testimony, as well as since then lots of other stuff, like going to Mike Lindell's Cyber Symposium, where he probably had PCAPs and a bunch of other stuff.
Yeah. So I think you started watching it kind of with an open mind. That's what I can tell from that Twitter thread. Like, you were willing to be convinced if that's what the evidence showed. Is that fair to say?
Right. Even if I think the conspiracy theorists express things in a little bit extreme way, I'm assuming there's truth behind everything. At some point, some claims are going to have evidence, and just because some crazy people are going crazy doesn't mean that rational people don't have a rational basis to believe something. If there's evidence, that's what we should follow.
Right. And so you started with that sort of mindset of an open mind, listening to what they were claiming. So one of the first claims that I saw you be concerned about was the notion that they showed the spider foot chart and said, it's basically a chart of dominionvoting.com, the domain, and it shows a number of, like in a web format, a bunch of connections. And the claim they made was that this shows that it's a set of internet traffic flowing, or, as in your eloquent words, a pew-pew graph.
Right.
So can you talk a little bit about why their claims about the Spiderfoot chart showing that it showed internet traffic, why was that claim incorrect?
And then what evidence do you have that there actually was connection to the internet?
Our teams looked at spider graphs of the Dominion network on election day and showed the increased web traffic, internet traffic on election day for Dominion servers.
So on election day, Dominion was communicating by internet?
Correct. This is a Spiderfoot reconnaissance tool that looked at dominionvoting.com network that was analyzed on November 3rd. And basically this shows vulnerabilities. It shows volumetric internet traffic, the raw data. It shows all of the web server's physical coordinates, all the vulnerabilities that are associated with the server. But basically, it does show that this was connected to the internet on voting day, and the volume of traffic was significant, and the vulnerabilities.
So this graph actually isn't this pew-pew graph of network traffic as they claimed. It's actually quite different. Spiderfoot is what's called an open source intelligence tool. And what it does is it has all these modules that scour the internet looking for sources of information and tries to tie them all together. So if I were to aim it at you, for example, it would go off and look for public databases that might have your name, might have your identifying numbers, your addresses, and so forth. If I focus it at a host on the internet, a server on the internet, which is what was done here, it'll find things like who used to host, who used to use that server. Because in the cloud, an evil person might be using a server one day and then go away, and then the cloud provider then sells that server, rents that server to another person. And so this open source tool can go find the history. It can also go find, well, what other servers around the internet have names similar to this thing? And it finds lots of things, and a lot more than that. And
So
that's what we see in that spider foot.
just to clarify, when you say it'll find someone who used to use that server, do you mean that IP address or that domain name?
That's a great answer. Both the domain name potentially, but primarily the IP address.
Okay.
And so that's what that Spiderfoot graph shows is it's a circular for some odd reason instead of like a tree or some other format. And it shows all the links. It shows all the information that it found, and then all the links between the things that it found. Like, oh, I find these 3 different things all shared the same IP address at one point in time. And so it's not traffic at all, as Phil Waldron claimed. Yeah, there's no traffic measurements in any of its data. There could be sources out there that show traffic, but this one didn't. It's just a list of various facts, and then which facts are linked to other facts are the lines.
Right. And
so it's absolutely nothing to do with what he described.
Yeah. It's got nothing to do with packet traffic and that sort of thing that they were talking about. Okay. Then another claim they made is they saw traffic increases in Frankfurt, Germany. Now, this actually was an involved claim because they were saying that Skytel, right? So most of these swing states, counties were using Skytel's Clarity election reporting on election night, and that was hosted by Amazon, the server for Skytel, and that was in Frankfurt for some time, I guess. And so they were very intent on showing increases in traffic to Frankfurt. Now, the thing is, were there traffic increases? And I don't think there were, because I also sort of researched it a little bit. But B, does it even matter? Because this was election night reporting. This was not where the votes were counted. So did you notice that during the hearing, or did you talk about it or tweet about it?
So this is one of the things I've hunted down and can't find anything. Yeah, there's a lot of Skytel servers, and when you host on Amazon, they can be anywhere in the world. So apparently, these were in Frankfurt. Amazon has data centers in the Northwest and around Washington, D.C., and so on. And the location doesn't much matter, other than they try to put them closer to where the customers are. So presumably, Skytel has a lot of business in Europe, and so that's why they have computers in a Frankfurt data center. But it's all the cloud, so trying to make inferences based upon location isn't really all that meaningful. I'm not sure what they meant by traffic. There's probably some tidbit of information that leads them to believe this, but they don't disclose it anywhere. The overall story is improbable. They sound like they're talking about network traffic, that they've got a monitor somewhere that monitors the load going from one location to the other, but they've got no ability to measure that. That would be a violation of the law, and it would require help from major internet backbone providers. So the whole story is improbable. It doesn't mean that there's not some factoid out there that they're concerned about. It's just that their explanation of that factoid is not what it can't be what it is that they claim.
Do you buy their, aside from the spider foot graph, do you buy their claim that these voting machines, Dominion machines, were actually connected to the internet? They weren't air gapped as, all the manuals say they should be. So that was one of the things they insisted on, that these machines were actually connected to the internet.
That's a good question. As you say, the manuals are very clear on how to use Dominion. And all the sites in specifically Colorado and Georgia that I've looked at, they all were air gapped. They did spend that effort. For example, in Georgia here, there was Coffee County issue that, as Trump has been involved with, where they invited Trump supporters in after the election, and they grabbed all sorts of equipment and stuff. Well, that incident shows that, among other things, is that those machines were properly air gapped. Another example is in Mesa County in Colorado, where the Trump supporter election official there made images of those machines public on the internet. And what we can see in the images is that, yes, indeed, those machines were properly air gapped. So everywhere where we've had the ability to see whether Dominion has been properly air gapped, it's been properly air gapped. Of course, it's possible that they weren't at some point in time. That we can't guarantee that thousands of these machines throughout the United States were air gapped. But the onus is on them to show evidence that they were not air gapped, to show us, not just make claims like, oh, I think these all sorts of machines were air gapped. Well, show us the actual evidence. And
I guess they
have not
thought they
done
were,
even vaguely that.
yeah, and I thought they thought they were showing evidence by showing that spider foot graph,
Graph, right. That was their
but
evidence,
that's
and
not,
as we know, that's not anything like that.
yeah. Okay. So there was another thing they talked about was spike analysis. This is another thing that Waldron mentioned, which is, he said his experts on the ground did spike analysis, which meant they were graphing the votes as they came in, and they showed a spike in the number of votes at a certain point in time, which they said was beyond the capability of machines to scan that many in at one point.
It's the Arizona fixing the vote chart.
So we noticed a difference in Arizona versus the other states. Our team mostly focused on what we call spike analysis, which were an electronic inject of a lot of votes, and where the number of votes that were injected in a specific time period exceeded the ability of the scanners to process ballots and upload. So basically, it's a signal of a potential anomaly where we would want to go in and do forensic analysis on the ballots that were processed in those batches.
Did you look into that claim at all?
Oh yeah, it's probably the claim that's at the center, not this specific analysis, but the overall issue that's at the center of the election claims, is that what Republicans saw going to bed that night was that Trump was leading in all these states like Georgia and Arizona. And when they woke up in the morning, Biden was leading. And when they look at the graphs as the election results were coming in, they would see spikes occasionally of votes for Biden. And that's just the general thing that they see. From anybody can see by looking at the graphs without any fancy analysis and putting names on it. And we already know where this comes from. It comes from the fact that for two things. The first thing is that in the election, because of the pandemic, there was lots of urges of people to move toward mail-in voting instead of in-person voting, mail-in ballots. which Republicans resisted, saying that that would allow all sorts of fraud. Trump specifically told his supporters, don't vote by mail. Instead, go into the voting booths and vote by person. So that's what his supporters did. And the upshot is that all the mail-in ballots throughout the country in every state favor Biden dramatically. It's like 60-40 for Biden versus Trump. And depending upon the states. I looked at various states, and some are dramatically, some are like 80-20 for Biden, some are just 60-40 for Biden. The average is 60-40. So we know that mail-in ballots will favor Biden.
Yeah.
Some states allow mail-in ballots to be counted even before election day. As they arrive, they're counted immediately. But then, of course, that information from that can leak out and then change the election. So other states require that those ballots just be stored in boxes and not be opened until after voting starts on election day, or even after voting stops on election day. Then you open the ballots. So in those states that counted the votes early, what you saw was an early Biden lead, because Biden led on the day from all the mail-in votes. And then as the voting day went on, you saw Trump catching up. With states where mail-in ballots were counted late, what you saw was an early Trump lead with then Biden catching up. And it's you can look at the law and match them right up, and it's all very consistent. It's consistent everywhere. Whether or not whoever won the state, actually, we still see the same thing on where mail-in ballots are counted early. Trump Trump does well, and then Biden does well, then Trump catches up. And then in these states like Georgia and Arizona, Trump is ahead, and then Biden catches up. So that explanation is not surprising. And in fact, Steve Bannon, one of Trump's inner circle, describes this on a phone call in October before the election, saying that this is what's going to happen. And that what Trump should do is he should claim victory early the night before the mail-in ballots have been counted in states like Georgia and Arizona, and claim victory and claim the presidency right ahead, because then people will believe that that's the legitimate victory, and so on and so forth. So they knew that this was going to happen and that people would believe this. And then the second part of this is that the spikes in the graph. The information we see on election night as results are coming in is not the official results. They have almost nothing to do with the official results. And they're full of errors and irregularities. For example, a batch of mail-in ballots that come from, let's say, Fulton County in Georgia, where the city of Atlanta is located, which is 80-20% pro-Biden, that they've been counted all night for hours. But then some election worker then calls up Skydle or something and says, hey, this is the latest result from those batches. And what you see then is a big spike in the graph on CNN or in the New York Times live tracker. It's all very unofficial, and they often make mistakes. Sometimes they call up Skydle or whoever's tracking the live information, say, oops, we made a mistake. It's actually 1/10 of what we said, and so you have to pull back the numbers. And so the numbers are very inaccurate and gyrate around and show spikes in graphs. When we look at other states, for example, Ohio is one of those states that counted mail-in ballots early, meaning Biden had an early advantage. We see spikes in the graph of Trump catching up, where we see this huge spike, just like we saw in Georgia pro-Biden. We saw a spike of Trump votes coming in because some rural area that had been counting all night just called them up and said, okay, here's the result. It's 80-20% pro-Trump. And so we see a spike in Trump votes. So we understand why Biden caught up on that night. And we understand why we see the spikes. And there's nothing in Waldron's analysis that could possibly show some sort of, he claims, sort of mathematical proof or statistical evidence or whatever, statistical experts just like the spider foot graph is that if things don't work this way, it can't possibly be the what he describes.
Okay.
I have
Yeah.
heard lots of claims about ballots where people are confused, and any little confusion, people will just take way too far. For example, there was in Georgia in the last week, there was something blew up about ballots being found elsewhere. And they weren't ballots, they were ballot application forms, the forms you'd fill out to say, hey, I want to be a mail-in voter. And so what we've seen for the last 3 years is that anything that looks anomalous gets blown up, waiting for people to look at it. And so far, none of them have panned out. It's
Yeah.
just a common thing, but none panned out.
Do you know how they guard against counterfeit mail ballots, for instance? Like, for example, if I wanted to counterfeit your vote, let's say, can I just print out a fake ballot, and write, well, it's a secret ballot, so it wouldn't have your name on it, but sort of print out like 500 of these and vote for Biden or vote for Trump and just shove them into the mail system? Can that happen?
Sure.
Is that okay?
But it'll get caught, is the thing.
And how would it get caught? What are the safeguards?
When you mail in your ballot with your name on it, my name, Robert Graham, I'm mailing in my ballot here in Georgia, they record the fact that, okay, Robert Graham's ballot has been received. It's a secret ballot. They don't know who have voted for yet. They just see the outside of the envelope. But they know Robert Graham has voted, we've received his ballot. And in the public records request that you can get for Georgia, it says the date they received Robert Graham's ballot. So if they received 10,000 ballots claiming to be from Robert Graham, they'll see that. Even before they've even opened the ballot to see what's inside, they'll see that there's been a problem with Robert Graham's vote.
Now, what if I'm not a citizen and I vote with my name, and then 500 of my non-citizen friends and relatives vote? Would that be caught?
Well, yes, because they look up your name in the voter rolls and say, okay. Are you allowed to vote? And we can't find your name. I'm sorry, we can't either count a ballot you've mailed in, or we can't let you vote in the live precinct.
Okay, so I think that this is one sort of concept that's been missing from a lot of this conspiracy theorizing, which is that the state actually has a database of people they can check off. You can't just like inject 1,000 ballots into the system unless it matches one by one the registered voters. And that's, I think, a concept that a lot of people haven't grasped. I think a lot of theories.
The basis for Trump's lawsuit in Georgia right after the 2020 election was listing all these irregularities of dead people voting, felons voting, people underage voting, and so on and so forth. And it's all nonsense because we have these databases and they're public. We can go through them and verify that no, there actually were, I think, 3 people in Georgia. There was like 3 or 5, I forget, very small. Trump claimed like 1,200, but the number was 3 or 5 of dead people voting. And there are in pretty much every state and every election about 3 people who vote who are dead because relatives, for example, get their mail-in ballot and then the person dies. So then the relative fills it in and sends it in. So it can happen, and it does happen, and those people are caught because then the election officials look at it and say, "Oh my God, this person we have received their ballot, but now we have the death records and show that this person's dead." So then they go investigate and they go find these people or arrest them and stuff like that.
Yeah, I see. Okay. So on to the general question. One thing I noticed is that most of the conspiracy theories that were raised all had a kernel of truth to them. For example, Dominion was written by Hugo Chavez to cheat. Well, it sounds entirely insane until you sort of go back and look. Yes, there were news reports in 2004 that Smartmatic in particular, there were questions about Smartmatic's code in Venezuela in a recall election. So it wasn't, as far as I know, it wasn't really resolved, but there were questions raised. And even the US Department, I forget, NIFT, I forget what that US agency is, but they were concerned as well. So that's the kernel of truth. But from that, they went on to Smartmatic software is the DNA of Dominion machines, which isn't true, and so on and so forth. And that it was, in any case, so that's like the kernel of truth. There's other examples. Yeah, a big one is often election experts like you, yourself, Halderman, other such people will raise concerns about vulnerabilities, and that's a real issue. That and election experts are very concerned with any possible way that cheating can occur, fraud can occur. So they will raise these vulnerability questions, even file cases. But then those vulnerabilities that bona fide experts have raised get milked into this conspiracy world. So do you know of a way to guard against that kind of phenomenon? Do you know what I'm asking?
Yeah, there's two things here, though. The Venezuela connection is, I wouldn't call that a kernel of truth.
Mm-hmm.
It's a fact that Smartmatic had Venezuelan code, and Smartmatic was then acquired by Dominion and blah, blah, blah. And it's not so much a kernel of truth as that conspiracy theorists hunt for anomalies that need to be explained. And when things can't be explained, their explanation is, the only possible explanation is that code is evil and tainted and controls our election. So they look for anomalies they can't explain, because then that confirms that there are things that are unexplainable, that it must be a conspiracy. And that Smartmatic stuff doesn't need to be explained. It's Dominion has engineers from all over the world working on their code. People in the United States, people in other countries. It's if there's a flaw in the code, this Venezuelan thing just doesn't matter. Any sort of flaw can come from anywhere. I can bribe someone working on Dominion code and have them. I'll pay them, $1 million to insert this code, and that can happen anywhere. So, the kernel of truth is that the code can have malicious people on it. That Venezuela is the source of maliciousness is just nonsense.
Yeah.
So, but the second thing is let's say the Haldeman report on vulnerabilities in the ballot marking devices for Dominion. That's clearly a good report by a security expert that says, hey, if these things happen, then these machines can be hacked and then votes can be flipped. And it's a great report. And your question is how can I defend against the conspiracy theorists who then promote this more than it's warranted?
Mm-hmm.
And we can't really, other than say that you're promoting that more than it's warranted. Specifically, the other side is that they need to show evidence to believe that it has been hacked.
Right.
For example, a friend gives me their jewels, and says, can you put them in your safe that you have at your home? And I say, sure, I'll put them in my safe. But I leave the safe door open. That doesn't mean that the jewels can be stolen, because the robbers would have to first know they're there. The robbers would have to break into my house. I would detect them breaking into my house with security cameras and so on and so forth. So from the Haldeman report, just because that there's a vulnerability doesn't mean that things were hacked. It's up to the other side to explain to me, no, in this 2020 election, we have evidence that those vulnerabilities were exploited. And there would probably be evidence, because there'd be a lot of people involved in a large conspiracy. There would be files left behind on the machines. There'd be all sorts of things to look at. So the point is that absent any actual evidence to believe to the contrary, this is Occam razors that we should assume that things were not hacked.
Yeah.
And that's the sort of that should be the start of every refrain, every debate talking about any conspiracy theory is, I don't need to explain anomalies. I need first to have the evidence to suggest that there's a problem here, that there's evidence of votes being stolen.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I think that's the end of my questions, but do you have anything that you would like to say about that hearing in particular, or just the entire period from, 2020 to 2021, the transition, all the theories, or anything about the next coming election of what we can do about such theories spreading again?
Well, I'm sort of a patriot. I'm sort of the person who would, if there were evidence, I'd be the first, at the January 6th riot, angrily expressing my displeasure.
Yeah.
And there are lots of people who call themselves patriots, like Phil Waldron, who nonetheless are caught lying. There's this whole presentation in front of the Arizona legislature or committee where he says things that are provably lies, that are not true. And that's been the problem with a lot of the election conspiracy theories, is that they're promoted by people who are caught lying. And as a patriot, if this is so important, that if you're caught lying about it, you're a non-patriot. You're the opposite of patriot. You're a traitor to the country. You're promoting something that is inimical to our system. We are a republic who selects our representatives and then selected by the people, and you're doing something that contradicts that. You're against the system. So that if we remove everyone caught lying from the conspiracy theories about all this whole election doubt, then there's almost no one left. That they're all caught, they're all tainted. We can't believe anything that they say, from Trump to Waldron to Mike Lindell to Steve Bannon to everyone, that they've lost the credibility because they've been proven conclusively to be liars. And that, I think, is one of the most important things we need to know about the election.
Right. In fact, the very first day, Trump came out and said, in fact, we did win the election, and this was a massive fraud. And, the thing I always try to communicate to people is how that's a lie. It's because there is no way he could have that knowledge at that date.
Right.
It was, I think, on November 3rd or maybe November 4th, but votes weren't even counted yet. So there is no earthly way that he would have that special knowledge of that there was fraud, other than feelings and vibes.
Right.
So that's like just such an obvious lie right up front.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. This continues, the election fraud narrative continues. So there will be a lot of people knocking at your door. Bye.
Goodbye.